Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Faya Kazi, and I am the head of the Academic Programs Department here in the Division of Education at the National Gallery. It's the responsibility of our department to do our best to organize lectures, performances, panels, symposia, which illuminate exhibitions and the permanent collection. And today, you are going to hear a lecture which is organized in relationship to the exhibition, which is in the West Building, Power and Pathos, Greek Hellenistic Sculpture. For those of you interested in additional programs besides this, we have a small brochure outside which lists all of our programs for the winter and spring. And when we sent the text down to the editor's office, it came back, it's all Greek all the time. That suits us just fine. There are lots of opportunities during the week, on weekends, and many of these programs will then be podcast on our website. So we look forward to having you revisit if you like the program, or if you miss something, having another opportunity to learn about it. Today's lecture is going to be given by a very well-known figure in Greek archaeology, George Koutsouflakis. This lecture is also co-sponsored by the DC Society chapter of the Archaeological Institute of America. I will introduce George in just a minute. You know, he's become familiar to all of us, George. I will introduce him in just a minute, but I wanted to say a word about our co-sponsor. Some of you may know that the Archaeological Institute of America is North America's oldest and largest organization devoted to the world of archaeology. It's a nonprofit group founded and chartered in the United States Congress already in 1906. Today, the AIA has nearly 210,000 members and more than 100 local societies in the United States, Canada, and overseas. Our members include professional archaeologists, corresponding members, students, and enthusiasts, and I like to think of all of you in one of those categories, all united by a shared passion for archaeology and its role in furthering human knowledge. As part of its mission, it promotes archaeological inquiry and public understanding of the material record of the human past, to foster an appreciation of diverse cultures and our shared humanity. The AIA supports archaeologists, their research and its dissemination, and the ethical practice of archaeology, educates people of all ages about the significance of archaeological discovery, and advocates the preservation of the world's archaeological heritage. I would like to say then now a few words about the DC Society. The Society was founded in 1895 by 22 members living in Washington, and thus it became the fourth local society of the AIA. Today, the DC chapter has nearly 300 members who have widely varying interests, ages, and backgrounds, and its history is marked by innovative projects and independent actions, supporting the great mission of the AIA. Today we have with us the president of the DC chapter of the Archaeological Institute of America, and I'd like to have, please, Professor Jorge Bravo from the University of Maryland. Please stand up. We also have in the audience some of those people who are behind exhibitions like this. And this is one which, if you've seen the reviews, or after this lecture you'll go back and see them, is being heralded as one of the great exhibitions of our time because of the quality of the material, the number of the loans, and its absolute newness in some cases. There are pieces that have not been seen before. So behind the scenes, two members of the audience deserve special mention. One of them is Dr. Susan Arensberg, who works here at the National Gallery in the exhibitions department and is our in-house coordinating curator. And I'd like to ask Susan Arensberg, please, to stand up. We are very lucky, too, to live in such a region like this, with such a rich professional staff at wonderful universities here in the area. And one of those is Professor Carol Matouche, George Mason University, who for the second time has been our advisor, has been my partner in crime in organizing programs, including a symposium that will be at the end of the program. And she will also give a standalone lecture on February 7th. And I'd like to ask Dr. Carol Matouche, the founding, really a foundational scholar for bronzes, also to stand up, please. Now I get to introduce today's speaker. George Koutsouflakis is Director of Archaeological Sites, Monuments, and Research at the Hellenic Effort of Underwater Antiquities of the Greek Ministry of Culture and Sports. He also serves as a member of the board of the Hellenic Institute of Maritime Archaeology. He completed his undergraduate and graduate studies in archaeology and the history of art at the University of Athens. Since 2006, he is director of the South Euboean Gulf Survey Project, a very large-scale underwater survey for the location and study of ancient and medieval shipwrecks. He has participated not only in maritime archaeology, but in numerous land digs, as well as throughout his archaeological work with maritime, throughout the Aegean. He's conducted himself a number of surveys in Crete, the Dodecanese, the Northern Sporades, and the Cyclades, and has contributed more than 40 previous unknown ancient shipwrecks to the database of known shipwrecks. I asked George if I could tell this story, but when someone asked me, well, this is amazing, why did you choose as the first big lecture by an invited speaker, someone on underwater archaeology? And I said, well, it's before the Greek shipwreck season. We can get him before he has to. So I made this story before, as I thought there were 4 seasons, you know, spring, summer, fall. No, there are 5. It's the Greek shipwreck season, too, that we need to take cognizance of. But the other story was when I said we had Professor Koutsouflakis coming here, and he said, him? Wow, only the god Poseidon knows more wrecks than he does. I'd like to welcome him to the podium.
Okay, thank you very much for all these exaggerations. But let me first state, as I did also in the Getty Museum a few months ago, that I'm not an expert in bronze statuary. As Faya Kosi foresaid, I'm an underwater archaeologist. I'm working in the Archaeological Service in Greece, and my main job is to conduct underwater surveys to spot and document remains of ancient and medieval shipwrecks. In doing this kind of job, I do not really choose what I'm going to find. If you ask any terrestrial archaeologist working in a specific site, he has some idea of what he is going to find. He knows what is to be expected, more or less. He may even have chosen to walk a certain area because he has specific expectations. In underwater archaeology, there is no such thing. You don't really know what to expect. By definition, a shipwreck is an unexpected event. As noted many times in the past, shipwrecks present evidence for the advance of archaeological studies that no other terrestrial or underwater site can possibly provide. The much pronounced range and quality of intact artifacts is just a side effect of the wreck research, one of the many and not the most important one. The opportunity shipwrecks offer to trace the nexuses between trade, trading routes, commercial strategies, shipping, and ship management reveals another substantial aspect of the value. But if we are to comment on the value of shipwrecks in a few words, its most recognized quality is its existence per se in space and time. Ships are self-contained and self-organized units, and their final resting place is in most cases independent or not directly connected to the historical topography of terrestrial sites. The term time capsule, adopted in order to express this disconnected reasoning, was first introduced somewhere in the 60s in order to reproduce the common perception about shipwrecks. It was used quite a lot as an underwater equivalent for the terms closed find or associated group that are extremely popular in terrestrial archaeology. Although not exactly right, the term is more of a simplistic theoretical frame. It has survived 4 decades of criticism and it is still largely in use today. The shipwreck is indeed an unexpected event. It can happen any time and in any place, so you have to be prepared to deal all kinds of exceptional findings. From the remains of Mycenaean shipwrecks, like the one excavated in the Modi Island in the Archaeological Gulf, dated to the 13th century BC, to post-Byzantine coin hoards of the Ottoman period. From amphora cargoes of the classical period, which are the most numerous, to wreck aeroplanes of the Second World War. According to a law issued recently, they are incorporated as well in our cultural legacy, so I had to start studying and learning about them as well. I'm doing this job for almost 25 years now. In the service, we select a huge amount of information about ancient shipwrecks reported to have all kinds of cargoes. Of course, the amphora cargoes are the most usual findings. New amphora wrecks appear almost every month, and they outnumber by far any potential or ability we have to investigate and excavate them. Information about amphora wrecks is registered in extensive waiting lists, and in some cases we have to wait even 3 or 4 years before we get the chance to verify certain information. However, there are other kinds of cargoes that do not provide the luxury of time. The most stimulating information arriving to us is when we hear about the existence of wrecks loaded with works of art, especially bronzes. When information of this kind is on the table, it's like dropping an atomic bomb in my office. I will try to explain you why. Underwater archaeology as an open water activity was initiated in the Aegean with an excavation of a shipwreck carrying bronzes. The history of an Antikythera wreck is well known. The official Greek state undertook and completed successfully in 1901 one of the most amazing archaeological operations ever conducted. Thanks to the handful of sponge divers from the island of Symi, the largest part of the cargo was raised, comprising of some of the most dazzling masterpieces of ancient sculpture, from depths which even today could make any professional diver uncomfortable with. In the other end of this chronological chain, no other project undertaken by the Effort of Underwater Antiquities has been more time-consuming in organization, more complex in application, more demanding in resources, and more celebrated by the press than the project Return to Antikythera, a first attempt with the assistance of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute to reevaluate this historic shipwreck and excavate it according to modern procedures. More than a century later, from their discovery, we still stand aghast and speechless in front of works such as the Antikythera Youth or the Antikythera Philosopher. Bronze statues have the ability to speak directly to the visitors, look down to his soul, without demanding specific intellectual prerequisites. They reveal something of the inwardness of the characters depicted in a way that cannot possibly be revealed on marble. It is the exquisite workmanship, it is the almost elastic material, but it is as well the feeling of the long exposure to the world of silence and the extraordinary, if not mythical, circumstances of the retrieval. A new promising era arose after the Antikythera project, which demonstrated for the first time to the world the potential of underwater archaeological research. Technological limitations, ignorance, and a series of unfortunate international circumstances, however, affected seriously any further steps towards establishing a discipline. For half a century later, shipwrecks were considered suitable only for salvage operations. Any other retrieval from the sea until the 50s remained coincidental, although the recovery of some of the most famous masterpieces of art worldwide is dated to that period. Bronze statues are raised mainly by the use of dragged fishing nets. It is a phenomenon as old as some of the raised statues themselves. Illustrated for the first time on a relief from Ostia found in the vicinity of the Temple of Hercules and dated around 70 BC. Commissioned by the Haruspex Gaius Fulvius Salvis and dedicated to the temple, the relief depicts, in the right, 6 fishermen pulling up their net and catching a supernatural statue of Hercules Promachos, among fishes, a dolphin and a cyst. It is not well understood if the episode depicted is coincidental or is it a deliberate act. 2,000 years later, the same story continues. Since in terrestrial sites only a few bronze specimens survived the vicissitudes of history, the Mediterranean remains by far the largest reservoir of bronze statuary, and a kind of reservoir that seems not to abide anytime soon. Today, according to the circumstances of recovery, we can discern bronze statues recovered from the sea in 3 distinctive groups. First, these chance finds that do not present traces of the post-depositional context, which are the most numerous. Secondly, bronzes that are recovered from excavated shipwrecks. And third, bronzes that originate from the so-called ghost wrecks. Ghost wrecks in the sense that we know they exist somewhere, but they are still elusive and resist discovery. I will rush into the first category, which contains mainly old finds, most of them well known, in order to gain some time for the less known recent finds. The earliest reported example of a bronze statue raised by nets in the Aegean is the so-called Berlin youth or Apollo, a headless corpus of a youth that is said to have been retrieved by Italian fishermen from the Sea of Salamis in the Saronic Gulf in 1878. Under unknown circumstances, it came afterwards in possession of the Saburov collection and was some years later, in 1884, acquired by the Antikensammlung in Alten Museum, Berlin. For almost a century, it was thought to be an original of the years around 400 BC. However, this dating has been significantly modified, and according to the latest studies based on technical details, the work is to be dated in the late 1st century BC. A few years later, in 1899, a bronze statue of another god was discovered in the shallows near the shore of the modern village of Agios Vasilios in southern Boeotia, affixed to an inscribed bronze base which identified the figure as Poseidon. The statue is dated to the very late archaic period and remains relatively unknown for many years. Newly restored in the 70s, it was placed on permanent display in Athens Archaeological Museum. Now, chronologically, the next bronze retrieved is an isolated find that appeared in June 1925 and is known under the conventional name the Marathon Boy. The statue was raised during the fishing operation of 2 trate, the traditional fishing boats using dragging nets, not far from the area of the ancient deme of Marathon. This almost intact bronze statue of the naked youth is one of the finest of the classical period. His corpus is rendered with a soft musculature and exaggerated contrapposto. The statue displays grace, gentle movement, agility, and a certain spirituality. All these are characteristics demonstrating a style usually associated with the school of Praxiteles. The work is dated traditionally between the years of the second half of the 4th century BC. All these 3 statues were single objects retrieved coincidentally from the sea and lacking a context. Although extensive underwater surveys have been conducted in order to locate the wreck sites they presumably were abstracted from, no evidence was ever found that could be possibly connected to them. This very fact opens again the pivotal question, why bronze statues are found underwater? Well, the obvious and most self-evident reason for that is that they form at once the cargo or part of the cargo of ships that never reached port in their final journey. But seriously, is this the only reasoning? A quite large number of excerpts culled from ancient writers declare that it is in fact not the only reasoning. Ancient bronzes could have been submerged underwater in antiquity for a couple of different reasons. First, as a result of an act of dumping or jettison, the legal term for goods or equipment thrown overboard from the sea at sea to lighten her if she is in danger. Second, as a result of physical phenomena like earthquakes, inundations, etc. And third, as a result of a state symbolic condemnation of the memory of a certain person, damnatio memoriae. The sea has been always considered as a place of no return, the place one could easily get rid of things he wouldn't wish to deal with them again. And the ancient sources refer shortly to what happened to the bronze portraits and statues of Demetrios Phalereos when the opposite Antigonist dynasty took control of the city of Athens in the late 4th century BC. These statues were either destroyed or thrown into the sea as part of a political condemnation. I will insist a bit more to the act of dumping or jettison, since to heave heavy things overboard was a priority action when a ship was in danger during the ancient times. Reference to jettison abound in the ancient sources. I will fly on a tangent here reading you a passage from Athenios, a writer of the 2nd to 3rd century AD, commenting on earlier work of Timaeus. So Athenias writes, Timaeus of Tavromenium reports that there is a house in Akragas referred to as the Trireme for the following reason. Some young men were getting drunk inside, and the drunkenness made them so feverishly crazy that they thought they were sailing on a trireme and had run into a terrible storm at sea. They were so out of their minds that they started throwing all the furniture and bedding out of the house, thinking that they were throwing it into the sea because the pilot was telling them that the ship's cargo needed to be jettisoned on account of the storm. And even though a crowd began to gather and steal the items being thrown out, the young men continued to act crazily. The next day, the city's chief official came to the house, and a charge was issued against the young men who were still seasick. When the magistrates questioned them, they responded that a storm has caused them trouble and forced them to jettison their excess cargo into the sea. When the officials expressed astonishment at their lunacy, one of the young men, who seemed in fact to be older than the others, said, "Triton, sirs, I was so afraid that I have thrown myself under the rowing benches, since that seemed like the lowest part of the ship and was lying there. They therefore forgave them for their craziness, ordered them not to consume any more wine, and let them go." And the young man, expressing their gratitude, said, "If," he said, "we escape this rough sea and reach a harbor, we will set up altars in our fatherland to you along with the other sea divinities as manifest savior gods, since you revealed yourself to us at such a crucial moment." This is the Loeb Classical Library edition, the translation by Douglas Olson. So this incident clearly demonstrates the generalized use of the act of jettison in ships in danger in antiquity, and we can assume that things dumped into the sea were in priority the heaviest on board. This might be justification of why so many attempts to locate these presumably wrecks failed, and also an excuse for all those who insisted surveying the same areas again and again without ever providing any new data. This includes also myself. After Antikythera, the first bronzes directly linked to a shipwreck came from the Sea of Artemision. It is this narrow strait separating the island of Euboea from the Pagasetic Gulf. The Zeus of Artemision was one of the most celebrated works of ancient art. was recovered by fishermen amidst the debris of the shipwreck. The left forearm was cast first in 1926 in the dragging nets of a fisherman. The find was reported to the Department of Antiquities, but since it was considered a chance find, no further action was undertaken. 2 years later, in September 1928, a boat was reported in the local authorities as performing illicit salvaging operations in the same area. The concerted action of the mayor of the town of Istiea and the police had led to the investigation of the suspected boat and confiscation of diving equipment and the right arm of a statue newly broken off. Right on the spot, a heavy cable was attached to something that the divers and crew were ready to pull up. From what it seems, the suspects had already unearthed the remaining bronze body of Zeus, and in the very next days, the authorities towed it ashore in the beach of the nearby village of Pevki. The work was restored and exhibited later in the National Museum of Athens. It is probably to be identified with Zeus hurling a thunderbolt. A date of about 460 BC is universally accepted. The incidents of the discovery triggered a general reaction by the press and the public. After the experience of Antikythera, the Department of Antiquities was reprimanded for not taking any serious action, since there were rumors circulated in the newspapers that other work still remained in the seafloor. The undertaking of a new, more intense investigation of the site was imperative. A new mission was pioneered by the effort Nikos Vertos, an enthusiastic land archaeologist, who did, however, not dive and could therefore not be directly involved in the underwater works. Diving in those days was still a dangerous and heavy task, and archaeologists could not possibly meet the demands of such operations. To quote a passage from George Bass, they stayed instead on deck and gratefully accepted the artifacts handed up to them by hired divers. The removal of academics from the find's archaeological context had a serious impact on our understanding of the early shipwrecks. Yet, Vertos' official report, precise in facts and accurate in his diction, remains still today the main source of information regarding the Artemision shipwreck. The expedition lasted less than 3 weeks. It was undertaken in the wrong time of the year, and it confronted extreme weather conditions. However, less than a meter apart from the position where Zeus was discovered, the divers unearthed and pulled up the forepart of the body of a horse and the statue of a small boy. A short expedition was repeated in the spring of 1929 before the project ceased due to the lack of adequate diving equipment. The efforts to locate the rear part of the horse failed, and Vertos insinuated in his report that it was washed away into the deep channel. This missing part appeared several years later, in 1936, caught by fishing nets in a spot several kilometers away from the site of the shipwreck. There is no official record that anyone witnessed the wreck site again, and all efforts to relocate the site by Jacques-Yves Cousteau, by Willard Bascom and Shirley Waxman failed. From what it seems, the site was silted without leaving visible remains. The statue was reassembled after extensive restoration went on display in the National Museum of Athens. The original artist and the circumstances under which the work was created are unknown. However, Sean Hemingway has suggested that it may have been plundered from Corinth in 146 BC by the Roman general Mummius during the Aegean War and given to Attalus as share of the booty, but lost while in transit to Pergamon. This is a common tendency around scholars to link wreck sites with bronzes with the plunderings that took place by the Romans in the 2nd and 1st centuries BC. No doubt many Romans probably got their first good look at Greek art in the form of plunder. It was an ancient Roman custom after military victories to have elaborate triumphal processions in which booty captured from the enemy was transported through the city in a pompous manner. In the Hellenistic period, when the Romans enjoyed a long series of triumphs over the various Greek opponents, this booty consisted to a great extent of works of art, sculptures, painting, and ornamental metalwork. Over a period of years, beginning from the Marcellus sack of Syracuse in 211 BC, and culminating with Mummius' sack of Corinth in 146, Rome became flooded by works of art. And in the long run, this would have an effect to Roman taste and sensibility. It is certain that in all these cases, the looted art from conquered land had to be transported by sea, and the loss of some ships was considered inevitable. However, in the 1st century BC, despite common acts of plunder, there was also a flourishing, legalized and refined art market, evinced in the correspondence of such high Roman officials as Cicero. Furthermore, there is strong evidence that the maritime transportation of bronzes started well before the Romans made any attempt towards the east. The excavation of the Porticello shipwreck in the Straits of Messina, dated as early as the beginning of the 4th century BC, speaks volumes about that. So we have to be very conscious when relating specific cargoes with acts of plunder. After the delivery of the last part of the Artemision assemblage, almost half a century passed without any significant new find in Greece. The only exception was the confiscation by the port police of a bronze statuette depicting Artemis. There is no substantial evidence concerning the origin, apart from the information that it was raised somewhere in the vicinity of Mykonos and perhaps linked in the nearby island of Delos in 1959. According to drapery and style, it should be dated to the early Hellenistic years. On the contrary, several bronzes were reported on the coast of Asia Minor, modern Turkey. The Lady from the Sea was found in 1953 by some fishermen dragging their nets along the coast of Arab Adazi, not too far from the Cnidian Peninsula, in a depth of around 100 meters. They brought the bronze to the village of Bites near Bodrum and disposed it on the beach. There, neglected and covered with marine incrustations, it remained for several weeks until it attached the attention of George Bean, the British professor of Istanbul University, who had the bronze removed to Izmir, where it was cleaned and hosted. 10 years later, in 1963, the half-broken bronze statue of a young Negro was pulled from the sea by sponge-bite draggers from 100 meters of water, not far away from the modern city of Bodrum. For both these finds, extensive underwater surveys were conducted in order to locate the shipwrecks they came from. The results, however, did not link those bronzes with any specific context. The last reported statue from the coast of Turkey is the bronze life-size statue of a runner discovered at harbor of Nemrut, near the ancient city of Kimi. This work should describe an athlete, a winner on running games of some sort. Somewhat awkwardly composed and schematically masked, he is remarkable for the individual features of the face, characterized by a long nose and a wide mouth. It is evidently a portrait, but it might as well echo a famous high classical statue, Myron's Ladas, which inspired numerous epigrams praising its swiftness and has not survived even in a replica. The face's individuality and hairstyle suggest a late Hellenistic or even an early Imperial Roman date. Moving back now to Greek territorial waters, the bronze equestrian statue of a male was delivered by fishermen to the authorities in spring 1979 from the sea near the island of Aistratis in the northern Aegean. It was recognized immediately with Augustus on the basis of the emperor's portraits depicted on coins. A ring in the left hand bears inside it a litus, a sign of the Pontifex Maximus, a title bestowed to Augustus by the Senate at 12 BC. The presence of that particular ring serves as a safe terminus postquem for the dating of the work and the shipwreck. Statues like this one were probably promoted by the Roman policy and distributed to the provinces to serve the imperial propaganda. There is evidence of another bronze equestrian cuirassed statue from the same area, suggesting that the wreck may have carried a number of such statues. A small part of a bronze statue was delivered in the effort of underwater antiquities in 1981, never published and forgotten ever since in the storehouses. It depicts the right thigh and the pterygii of a lower part of a cuirass of another equestrian statue in the natural sides, possibly a companion of the general Augustus, although there is no clear evidence that the two bronzes originate from the same wreck. Now, if we move towards the more recent finds, the monumental bronze statue known as the Lady of Calymnos was dragged by nets in the area east of Calymnos in 1994. According to the information, it was raised by a Trata boat from a depth of about 120 meters. The face has the generic and idealized features typical of the 4th and 3rd century BC female heads. It is an Hellenistic variation of the statue type known as the large Herculaneum woman. Variants of this type were used during the Hellenistic period to portray women from the middle and upper classes, queens or even goddesses, and in a way it provides the absolute personification for the demure and the respected lady of that era. The delivery of this specific statue, the Lady of Calymnos, in the Archaeological Service had a huge impact in the policy against fishermen using dragging nets. The Calymnian fisherman was rewarded with a stupendous amount of money, and as it seems, this triggered a chain reaction in the fishing community of Calymnos. For the next 20 years, parts of statues were delivered to the department, some of them newly found and raised from the sea, some others stored for years in Calymnian cellars. We can assume in some instances that dragging nets for the recovery of bronzes was considered much more profitable than dragging nets for fishing. We can only imagine the damage inflicted to ancient shipwrecks on the deeps. Whatever entered the service from 1994 and on was very fragmentary and with a highly questioned origin. The most complete piece is the bust of an armored horseman, found in 2009. The bronze is preserved from the neck down to the flaps of the cuirass. The figure is about 1/4 larger than life size and wears a cuirass over the short-sleeved tunic. The visible right shoulder strap is decorated with a relief of a winged thunderbolt. The left shoulder strap is hidden by the chlamys, which, fastened on the right shoulder, folds over the chest and falls back over the left shoulder, covering the entire back. A strap hangs from the neck down to the left side of the cuirass and is decorated with a plate incised with an archaistic female figure. The cuirass is tied at the waist with a cloth belt that crosses on the back to tie an intricate knot on the center front. The whole work is fully decorated with minor details, like a sphinx under the armpit, a line of flying birds in the belt, and double spiral motifs in the lower part of the thorax. The two missing legs of the figure were also found in the Sea of Calymnos some years before. The legs are almost identical, and as has been proved some months ago, they fit perfectly to the horseman. The knees are bent, and the sandals have intertwined leather thongs that are tied to the instep by the leather strap that reaches to an ankle. This type of shoe is an almost perfect match with a krapis, a sandal which, according to Pliny the Elder, was worn when traveling on foot or horseback. Feet wearing identical shoes are likewise found in Hellenistic bronzes, especially statues of riders. All known examples date to the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC. A second and even more fragmentary body of an armored rider was found in the same waters in 2006. Like the previous horseman, this one too wears a short-sleeved tunic garment, the same type of cuirass, and over it a chlamys, which is fastened at the right shoulder and runs across the chest to fall freely on the back. The bottom part of the armor is decorated with a band of sized pairs of spiral motifs, while the edge has the same double pterygge as the first statue. This figure also has the same elaborately tied belt. The two horsemen wear the same type of armor, which probably corresponds to a spolas, a short leather cuirass supposedly worn by riders. The clothes are similar style. They are of similar size, and they were found in the same waters. Therefore, it is reasonable to attribute them to the same shipwreck. A dating for these two statues can be based on stylistic and typological criteria. The belt on the two armored riders serve no practical purpose and have been correctly associated with the Persian girdle worn by Alexander the Great. Through portrayals of the diadochi, it was adopted by the Romans, who used to indicate that the wearer held an official post. The stylistic analysis of some details of the clothing, especially the overlapping fringes along the edges of the pterygge, supports a more precise dating. There are obvious similarities with the rendering of the fringes in the bronze armored horsemen from Dodona and Olympia, dated to the end of the 3rd and the beginning of the 2nd century. Now, the last accession to this group is a bronze head, slightly larger than life size, found in the sea northwest of Calymnos, so in the completely different part of the island than the previous ones. And it usually is attributed to the larger horseman. The head is a portrait of a mature bearded man wearing a kafsia, the felt hat worn at the Macedonian court and used by the diadochi as a distinctive sign of their origin. The head is gently tilted with separated lips and eyes looking slightly upward, but it has also some personalized characteristics such as short curly beard, moustache, short hair, and deep horizontal vertical wrinkles in the middle of the forehead. These characteristics suggest that it was a portrait of a well-known man, a face that was to be immediately recognizable. Up to now, it has been not possible to identify the big rider with any certainty. It is, however, suggested that it is a famous Macedonian king. Certain details of the garment speaks volumes to that. The winged thunderbolt of Zeus and archaistic style deities are common ground in Macedonian coins, and a pair of sphinx were decorating a huge Macedonian tomb excavated recently in Amphipoli. On the basis of the iconographic characteristics and the style, the bronze head from Calymnos should be dated to the 3rd or 2nd century BC. This includes the whole Antigonid dynasty, but further details of the garment may help to narrow this chronology between the late 3rd and the first half of the 2nd century BC. About the conditions of transport and loss of the statues retrieved from the Sea of Calymnos, we can only make speculations. In any event, the group of sculptures described here does offer some good chronological evidence about the last sea voyage. An intact amphora, partially covered with calcareous deposits containing a high percentage of copper oxide, was found together with the second armored figure. This means that the armored figure and the amphora were in the same underwater post-depositional context for a long time, and we can easily assume that the amphora was part of the cargo or the supplies of the ship carrying the statues. It is a typical example of a Cnidus-type amphora, which on the basis of the shape and the two stamps can be dated approximately between 78 and the end of the 1st century BC. So, the transport of sculptures overseas can therefore be related to historical events that include the devastation of Delos by the armies of Mithridates VI of Pator at 88 BC, the sack of Chios 86 BC, the sack of Athens by Sulla, 86 BC again, plundering in the eastern Aegean, Asia Minor, Bithynia, and Pontus by Lucius Licinius Lucullus and Pompey during the 3rd and 4th Mithridatic Wars, and Cassius' sack of Rhodes, which was famous for its many bronze statues in 42 BC. The latest isolated find in the Aegean is a life-sized bronze statue of a nude male that was raised from the depth of about 500 meters in the area west of Kythnos, in the Cyclades. The figure's weight rested on the now missing right foot, while the left foot is set back. Following the movement suggested by the position of the legs, the upper body turns somewhat to the left. The left hand probably held an object. This may have been a discus, and in that case, the statue could be an athlete passing the discus from one hand to the other as he moves forward and bends his right leg before starting the wind-up of the throw. The dating of the sculpture is still very uncertain and depends on the potential relationship of the statue with a shipwreck found in the same area, loaded with cargo of Chian amphorae of the late 4th or early 3rd century BC. If it is directly from the late classical or Hellenistic period, if not, it could be a late Hellenistic variation of the late classical original made by the Peloponnesian school. Ships transporting bronzes remained elusive, with the exception of the Antikythera shipwreck now under excavation. For some reason, they resist discovery or even relocation, no matter how much effort, time, and means have been spent in hunting them. There are several reasons for that. The great depth, the dynamic underwater environment, the misleading information given, but I would say also our complacency in the use of remote sensing devices like scan sonars, sub-bottom profilers, multi-beam echo sounders, and ROVs. These all are subsidiary devices to be used with sense, and they can't possibly substitute the effectiveness of an experienced eye. If underwater archaeologists are not willing to dive and spend all the time in watching screens of remote sensing devices, this is simply not enough. Missions organized in order to explore the deep have an extremely expensive operational cost, and as experience has demonstrated, they don't often do pay off. Instead of trying to locate the perfect untouched shipwreck in the chaotic depths, is far better investment of money and time would have been to focus on wrecks in the middle range of depths. I will take here the Styra wreck as a characteristic example. It is a wreck located in the southern Aegean Gulf, off the island of Styra in the depth of about 40 to 45 meters. The main cargo consisted of North Peloponnesian amphora to be dated in the late 2nd, early 1st century BC. When surveying and documenting this cargo in 2010, we noticed the existence of a secondary cargo well hidden under the sediments. Several pieces of bronze in natural size were unearthed just by removing slightly the sand. Together with these finds lying side by side were recovered also 2 legs of a table or a couch, heavily concreted in marine incrustations. X-ray revealed that the original bronze rings and the wooden core were still intact. Pieces of luxury furniture are seldom found in ancient shipwrecks, with the only other known examples being the shipwreck of Antikythera and the shipwreck of Madia found in the coast of Tunisia, both known for the cargo of bronzes as well. The Styra's work exemplifies also another thing. How do we expect that looks a shipwreck loaded with a cargo of bronzes? Were there special kinds of ships transporting bronze statues to the west? The scholars insisted a lot to the heavy construction of the hull remains of the Antikythera wreck exhibits. No doubt the Antikythera ship was a huge vessel with certain characteristics that only exceptional large ships of the Roman era presented. However, the rest of the consignment shipped together with the statue and the luxury items does not differ seriously from any other cargo circulated around those years between the Aegean and Rome. For example, in the Antikythera context, we still find Rhodian, Koan, Cnidian, and Labolia II amphorae. Cnidian amphorae were ostensibly carried together with the bronzes recovered from the wreck in Calymnos. Amphorae are also reported from the Artemision shipwreck, and we can trace these mixed consignments back even to the 4th century, with the Porticello shipwreck being the most characteristic example. I believe that these facts clearly demonstrate that common boats loaded with any kind of commodity were used to do the crossing, and the correspondence of Cicero in a letter written from Rome in March 67 BC seems to verify that. Cicero orders to his agent Titus Pomponius Anticus to find him Megarian statues, pedelic herms, and any other statue suitable to a lecture hall and colonnade. Closing his letter, he underscores, "If a ship of Lentulus is not available, put them aboard any ship you think fit." It seems that any ship seaworthy and safe enough to do the crossing could have been used for the transport of works of art. And if we press this argument to its extreme end, any shipwreck, any amphora carrier dated between the years 150 BC and 50 AD could have carried bronzes. According to that, we tend to be extremely suspicious when locating amphora cargoes which can be related more or less with the West. You don't really expect to find visible remains of statues in the surface layer of ancient shipwrecks. Simple reasoning demands that heavy commodities were not packed on the deck in transit. They were instead located in the lower departments of the hull. If this is right, sculptures might be covered by other items such as amphorae. So even in shipwrecks that are preserved in good condition, the location of possible bronzes might be very tricky. This is a characteristic example of a shipwreck that was found some years ago in the Ionian Sea, so the sea that basically separates mainland Greece with Rome, near the island of Kefalonia. Is located in a depth of about 65 meters. Well, you count in feet here, I think, so 65 meters is almost, I believe, 200 feet or something. It's a huge vessel, maybe one of the largest ever found in the Aegean. It's loaded with at least 4,000 amphoras of the Brindisi, of the Lambolia II type, with also some Cnidian and Rhodian amphoras inside the consignment. So basically, it's the right shipwreck, according to the cargo and the positioning, to look for ancient, for bronze statues. But again, we have to consider it's in 65 meters, and you have all this pile of amphoras that might be, above the sculpture. So in 65 meters, you have a walking time for a couple of divers, let's say, in the best case, 10 minutes. In 10 minutes, what they will be able, in the best case, to do is just to lift one amphora to the surface. If they don't have to chisel out the amphora, if it's not concreted to the next of the cargo. So you understand how difficult it gets. Leaving aside for the future the potentiality of all those possible candidates for the transportation of bronzes, we ought to focus also to the relocation of wrecks we surely know that are existing. As it is well understood till now, bronzes separated from their context, like in most cases when originating from underwater, are in a sense like bronzes fallen from the sky. No doubt, we still can evaluate them as objects of art, but we lose all the historical circumstances of the removal. We can't easily guess where they came from. We can't guess where they were heading. And we can't guess, not even to date, the date of the transit, which might connect it with historical events of great gravity. The project Return to Antikythera has led the way, demonstrating that perseverance indeed pays off in underwater investigation. And let me remind you here that although only 4 decades passed after Jacques Cousteau's last enterprise in that wreck, relocating the Antikythera shipwreck was not an easy task. It was quite puzzling. I believe the next priority for my department is a similar project that should be called Return to the Artemision. We already scheduled that, and possibly we're going to be able to be back in the field in 2017. Now, before I end this lecture, let me see if I can stir the blood of the under 25 of the audience. Aegean is the sea where the most prominent of the ancient Mediterranean civilization plied, creating interconnections. On the surface of the sea, traders, smugglers, pirates have been active for more than 5,000 years, taking full advantage of the possibility the physical entrepot had to offer. An endless skein of human actions, reactions, triumphs, and tragedies which left their traces in the depths. And under the surface, another vast field of exploitation. Fishermen, sponge divers, salvagers, looters, souvenir hunters, a field severely violated, suffering all kinds of thuggish behavior with no sense of propriety. And in the end of this long line, as the last session, a new species of exploiters, underwater archaeologists. It is a sea that everybody wants to harvest. Diachronically, for everyone in the Aegean represents basically the same thing, a sea of opportunity. Intentions, attitudes, perspectives, and methods may well differ, but the very fact remains the same. Everybody seeks his fair share of what the sea has to offer. Now, after let's say 4 decades of underwater research, what we accomplished is just explore the 5% of the area of the Aegean. So this means that there's tremendous amount of work, what at least another 2 generations of archaeologists. So really the gauntlet is on the floor for anyone to pick it up. It's a demanding work, but I can assure you it pays off. Now, ending, I would like to thank the organizers of this lecture for inviting me here, and especially Ms. Haya Kosei, Pale Allison, Sarah Barton, and also Karol Matusz. Let me say that I'm usually accustomed to speak in front of, half-empty halls. So this is the first sold out of my career, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Yes, thank you very much again.